The sky over Münster, Germany, was a battleground of smoke and fire. First Lieutenant John Justice held tight to the control yoke of his B-17 flying fortress, his eyes darting across the chaos around him. The formation of 13 American bombers was under siege. Messerschmitt fighters sliced through the ranks, tearing into the flying fortresses with relentless cannon fire. One after another, the bombers fell. Justice's squadron leader went down first, his aircraft breaking apart before vanishing in a ball of flames. Another plummeted in a spiraling descent, its crew trapped inside. Justice shoved the controls forward, trying to escape the onslaught. But a 20mm shell punched through the fuselage. The aircraft lurched violently. Another explosion ripped into the wing, flames crawling across the metal frame. Smoke poured into the cockpit. He had seen this before. The aircraft was finished. There was no time to hesitate. He grabbed his parachute, secured the harness, and forced his way toward the bomb bay doors. The heat was unbearable. Flames licked at the fuselage as the bomber spiraled downward. Then, he jumped. For a moment, there was nothing but open air. The battlefield raged above him, but gravity pulled him down, fast. At 500 feet, the parachute deployed. His body wrenched midair as the silk canopy snapped open, slowing his fall just in time. Below, enemy territory stretched endlessly. No sign of his squadron. No chance of rescue. Then, in the distance, shadows moved among the trees. German soldiers, closing in fast. Justice had survived the fall, but the battle for survival was just beginning. In February 1942, the United States launched an ambitious campaign in Europe. The 8th Air Force landed in England, tasked with crippling Hitler's war machine. Their mission: bomb Nazi strongholds and dominate the skies. Back in the US, the military rushed to form new bomber groups. Among them was the 100th Bombardment Group, based in Nebraska. Under Colonel Dar H. Al-Khair, training began immediately. The men were told this war would be brutal, not glamorous. By April 1943, their combat readiness was put to the test. A 1,300-mile navigation exercise ended in failure. Planes went off course, some landing in Las Vegas, others in Tennessee. Al-Khair was removed from command. But problems remained. Training schedules were chaotic. Fistfights broke out between restless airmen. The war, however, would not wait. In May 1943, orders came. The 100th was deploying to England. Crossing the Atlantic, they carried more than just equipment. They carried the weight of General Ira Eaker's promise to Britain: "We hope, when we leave, you will be glad we came." R.A. Thorpe Abbots, Norfolk, England, the new home of the 100th Bomb Group. On June 25, 1943, they flew their first mission, the U-boat yards in Bremen. As the B-17s approached enemy airspace, anti-aircraft fire erupted. Black clouds of flak tore through formations. Then, the Luftwaffe attacked. Messerschmitt fighters swooped in, cannons blazing. The crews fought to hold formation, but their inexperience showed. Engines burst into flames. Windows shattered. Bombers fell. Before reaching the target, 3 aircraft were lost. 30 men never returned. The survivors struggled back to Thorpe Abbots, their aircraft riddled with holes. The war had just begun. and they had already paid a heavy price. In the weeks that followed, the 100th Bomb Group flew deeper into Nazi territory. The missions only became more dangerous. Planes returned in tatters. Crews barely had time to grieve. By the end of the summer, whispers spread. The Bloody 100th. It was a name that carried fear and respect. For others, a death sentence. A young airman receiving orders to join broke down in tears. He wasn't alone in thinking he wouldn't make it back. For many, he was right. The war was only just beginning for the Bloody 100th. By summer 1943, the 100th Bomb Group had already seen combat, but the real test was still ahead. Each mission took them deeper into enemy territory, and each time, fewer men returned. Their job was clear: cripple Hitler's war machine. But German defenses were ruthless. The Luftwaffe and anti-aircraft batteries turned every bombing run into a fight for survival. On June 25, 1943, just weeks after arriving in England, the 100th launched their first mission, a bombing run on Bremen's U-boat yards. As the bombers crossed the North Sea, the sky remained clear. But as they neared the target, a wall of flak erupted ahead. Anti-aircraft guns fired relentlessly, tearing through the formation. Then, the Luftwaffe attacked. Messerschmitt Beef 109s and Fokker-Wulf, few 190s dove from above, firing into the B-17s. Pilots struggled to maintain formation as engines caught fire and metal tore apart. 3 aircraft went down before they even reached the target. 30 men never returned. The bombers that survived completed the mission, but at a heavy cost. As they turned for home, their formations were in chaos, and the sky was filled with smoke and falling wreckage. By the time the survivors reached Thorpe Abbotts, they had learned a harsh truth: this war would not be won without blood. By August 1943, the 100th was assigned a high-risk mission, bombing the Messerschmitt aircraft factory in Regensburg. But this time, there was no return flight to England. The plan was to bomb the target, then fly south to airfields in North Africa. On August 17th, the B-17s took off at dawn. The 100th was positioned at the rear of the formation, the most exposed and vulnerable spot. As they crossed into Germany, anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Flak shook the bombers, ripping holes through fuselages. Then came the fighters. Waves of Luftwaffe aircraft attacked. One by one, the flying fortresses fell. Some exploded mid-air. Others spiraled to the ground, trailing smoke. The 100th suffered heavily. By the time they cleared enemy airspace, 9 aircraft were gone, 90 men lost. But they had no time to grieve. The survivors pressed on, fighting exhaustion and dwindling fuel, finally landing in North Africa. The mission was a success, but at a price few could bear. By October 1943, the 100th Bomb Group was already known for its high casualties. But it was over Münster, Germany, that they earned their most infamous reputation. On October 10th, 13 B-17s took off to bomb Münster's railway and industrial center. It was supposed to be a standard raid. It wasn't. As they neared the city, the sky turned black with flak. Anti-aircraft shells burst around them, rattling cockpits and shredding metal. Then, the Luftwaffe attacked. The bombers never stood a chance. Messerschmitt fighters tore into the formation, firing at close range. One by one, the B-17s fell. By the time they reached Münster, only 1 aircraft remained airborne. That lone B-17 was Pasadena Nina, piloted by First Lieutenant John Justice. A 20mm shell struck the fuselage, crippling an engine and sending the aircraft into a violent spin. Justice and his co-pilot fought for control, managing to level out just above the treetops. They were defenseless. The Luftwaffe closed in. More bullets ripped through the aircraft. The crew had no choice. They jumped. One by one, parachutes bloomed in the sky as Pasadena Nena vanished below the trees. Justice landed alone in enemy territory. The rest of his squadron was gone. The mission had been a disaster. By the end of the Münster raid, the 100th Bomb Group had lost every aircraft it sent. Not a single B-17 made it home. The loss was so devastating that the rest of the 8th Air Force took notice. Among thousands of men who fought in the skies over Europe, one name now carried a weight like no other. The Bloody Hundredth. It was no longer just a nickname. It was a warning. For those stationed at Thorpe Abbotts, it was a death sentence. For those watching from the ground, it was a glimpse into the brutality of war. And for those flying into battle, it was a fate that could not be escaped. The war was far from over. The Bloody Hundredth's deadliest days were still ahead. For 2 days, Justice moved carefully through the woods. Every sound rustling branches, distant voices meant danger. By the second night, exhaustion set in. Cold, hungry, weak, he needed help. Spotting a small farmhouse at the forest's edge, he took a risk. He knocked once and waited. Inside stood a Dutch farmer and his family. They knew the cost of helping an American airman, immediate execution if caught. But without hesitation, they let him in. Justice was no longer alone. The Dutch resistance was one of the most effective underground movements in Nazi-occupied Europe. They moved Justice from one hiding place to another: barns, attics, cellars. Each night, he was guided further away from the search parties. The risk was constant. Gestapo patrols searched villages. Soldiers went door to door. Any mistake, any wrong move, and he would be caught. Yet, even as food ran scarce, the Dutch shared what little they had. Justice survived on rationed bread, potatoes, and secrecy. Weeks passed. The network led him south, through forests, across rivers, toward neutral ground. The Gestapo was closing in, but so was freedom. By late December 1943, Justice reached the Belgian border. From there, resistance fighters guided him into France. The final stretch was the most dangerous. German checkpoints were everywhere. But the network never failed him. At last, he crossed into Spain-neutral territory. British intelligence operatives took him in. Justice's story was one of resilience. But he had not escaped alone. The Dutch resistance had risked everything to save him. The battlefield of World War II was not just in the skies. It was in the villages, the hideouts, and the silent defiance of those who fought without weapons. But the war was far from over. By late 1944, the 100th Bomb Group had survived some of the deadliest air battles of the war. They had faced overwhelming odds, but they never stopped flying. On New Year's Eve, 1944, the 100th launched one of its final high-risk raids, a strike on Hamburg's oil refineries. Germany's fuel supply was dwindling. The Allies needed to shut it down completely. Even in its final months, Germany's air force remained deadly. Fighters descended on the bombers, tearing through formations. Some aircraft were lost. Others barely made it back. But the mission was complete. By war's end, the 100th Bomb Group had flown over 8,000 missions. They had suffered one of the highest casualty rates in the 8th Air Force. Over 700 airmen lost, 177 aircraft destroyed. But they had fulfilled their duty. They had honored the promise of General Ira Eaker, made years earlier: "We hope when we leave, you will be glad we came." And they had left behind more than just wreckage and destruction. They had left behind a legacy of courage, sacrifice, and unbreakable resolve. The airfield at Thorpe Abbotts eventually fell silent. But the name Bloody Hundredth would never be forgotten. It would live on in history, in memory, and in the skies they once ruled. Subscribe to FLYTOP for real war stories that shaped history. Next time, we uncover another pivotal moment that changed the course of war. Don't miss it.